Hey, hey, what is going on?
Hey, hey, how are you?
Not bad. How you feeling?
Feeling great. We're live.
We are live. Yes, we are.
Yeah, feeling great. Ready to celebrate you.
Yes. It's a long time coming, and obviously this would not have been possible without the collaboration of so many people. But for starters, um, thank you all for those who are currently live, and I'm sure there'll be more people coming. But if not, you know what? We're going to celebrate with those who are here with us. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and I am the author of the soon to be released book, Learning to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culture Affirming Classroom. This is not my first book. This is actually my third one, but the first to go through a major trade publisher. So this is a huge deal, a major deal. And I have to say, the reception has been positively overwhelming. Just people's responses to the book, the early reviews, the reactions. It's been surreal. So I don't know, but there's a lot there. So the way this was gonna work today was honestly, I'm gonna be honest. I don't really have much of a script. I'm going off the rip because that's just how I feel right now. I feel like we're just gonna have some good conversation. And I want to be an opportunity for those who are watching to ask any questions that they may have about the book. But we also want to go ahead and just share a little bit about the journey of learning to relearn, how it started, and how we got to this point right now, because I think it's important for those, particularly those who do want to write a book one day or have aspirations of becoming authors. You want to get a sense of what that process is. Now, obviously, I'm not going to give you everything, but I'll give you a little bit of game, just to let you know what's going on. Ah, look who is here. Hey, Tracy.
Hey, how are you?
Not bad. How are you feeling?
I'm so happy to be here with
Yes,
us to celebrate with you.
yes, yes. So, as I was saying, this is a celebration. This is the opportunity to connect with the community and just share a little bit about how we got to this point. So, before we do get started, I want to make sure we properly introduce my co-guests, who are here to share a little bit about their roles in that journey. So to my right, we have the phenomenal illustrator of the cover and a lot of the creative elements in this book, Miss Jennessa Burks. On my right, so I'll let Jennessa just share a little bit about the great work that she does, and then we'll move on to Tracy. So I'll give you the floor, Jennessa.
All right. Hi, I'm Jennessa. I'm an artist. I'm also an educator. So, extremely excited about this book merging both of those worlds together. I'm an elementary educator in Cambridge, Mass. I'm an artist who works not only um, in gallery pieces. I also do murals with an emphasis on community murals and have moved into illustration, which you kind of do before you end up with a mural anyways, you digitize. So it was like taking that community project and moving it into a book world, which was a fabulous opportunity. So excited to be here.
All right. Well, thank you, Janessa, for sharing a little bit about that. And then right below the two of us is my editor, the one who I spent the most time with throughout this process, and someone who's grown to become a real good friend of mine, Mrs. Tracy Zager, who is also one of the best math educators I know. But I'll let her go ahead and share a little bit about herself as an editor, but also some of the other things that she does that goes unnoticed. So Tracy, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Kwame. It's awesome to be here with the two of you. This was such a fun collaboration. So I'm a math coach and author of my own books. And then for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been editing professional books for teachers. And normally I focus in math, and Kwame has roots in math. He was a math educator, is where he got figured out his role in the education community. But this book was such an exciting book for me because I learned so much in content. The content was broad in scope, and so that was really exciting. And my goal as an editor is always to help people figure out how to say what they want to say. Look who's here.
Sorry to interrupt. Hello.
Hey, Yoli, what's going on?
Yeah, don't let me interrupt, Tracy, please.
We're gonna get to you.
I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this all day.
It's so nice to have something to celebrate. Can I just say that right now? Things are complicated, so it feels really good to come together and celebrate with you all. So I was just finishing up just saying that I love helping writers find their voices and lifting and amplifying those voices, because I work with people who have important things to say. So this book was a delight to work on, and we were honored. I don't want to speak for Kwame, but I was excited about your foreword. So I'll let Kwame introduce you.
Thank you.
Yes, and right below me, she really doesn't need any introduction. This woman has been a North Star for me, just an inspiration. Her work, her scholarship has done a lot to reframe my own understanding of what it means to be an educator. Honestly, this book does not get written without this woman's scholarship. She is a multi-hyphenate by every sense of the word. She just does so much for others, and I'm honored to call her a sister. So without further ado, I'm gonna introduce y'all to Dr. Yolanda Sealey Ruiz, but we affectionately call her Yoli because that's just who she is to us. I'll let you have the floor to just share a little bit more about what you're doing.
I really want to talk about what you're doing, but let me just say hello to, is it Jennessa or is it Jennessa? Jennessa and Tracy and Kwame. Oh my goodness. First of all, for you to say that about me, I feel like the honor needs to be reversed, because brother, the books that you put out and the Identity Talk podcasts that you have been so consistent and committed to really is the multimodal scholarship that my students and others turn to. And so when you mentioned you were writing this book and, just asked, okay, would you be interested in doing the foreword? I hope you remember it was immediate. It was immediate. And what it allowed me to do, honestly, Kwame, was to look at my own work through the lens of your work and to reflect on the time I was with you on the Identity Talk, and when Goldie and others have been on that beautiful show, and what you bring out in us. And I do feel like what you've done with the book, you put a lot of yourself out there, as you often do, right? You mix like who I am as an educator, who I am as a global thinker. And folks, Kwame is all over the globe, literally doing the work, not just in US context, but really taking the journey in global context. And so, brother, the last thing I'll say, that it was a pleasure and an honor, and you gave me a platform to go a bit more deeply into my own work on racial literacy and also do some of my own self-work. So thank you. May this book be in every classroom, in every teacher education space, and honestly also in businesses. I want to say, like, businesses need to start reading some of this work and get things in order in their corporations.
Wow. I don't even know how to respond to that. Just coming from you, that's a lot. That really means a lot, because so much of what you do is influenced by the writing that I put into this book. Like I don't even think you even understand the depth of that. It's just wow. But we're gonna get more into that. But since you brought it up, Yoli, I want to talk about the beginning, because a lot of people don't realize how this journey got started with learning to relearn. I mean, when I brought the concept to you, it was very much an idea.
Yep.
It was just a concept. I didn't have the full manuscript together. I just knew that this was something that I wanted to do. And I've told this story on many platforms, but just to let people know how we even got here, it all started in 2021. I was doing a virtual conference through different platforms because it was COVID, the height of it. So people were trying to find their professional learning in different places on these virtual streets. And I just thought, well, everybody's doing these virtual conferences. I'm going to do one too. So I did the Stay True to Teacher and Youth Summit. And funny enough, my sis, Shauna Brown, aka T for the Culture, she was one of the presenters on that summit, and met 20 other phenomenal presenters, multicultural, multiracial backgrounds, all kinds of intersections were hitting. So I'm advertising this just this event, and I'm thinking, oh, this is cool. Like I'm getting all the different communities represented here through the presenters. But then I get a comment on my IG from an account called Indigenous Educators, and she posed the question, do you have any Indigenous presenters for this conference? And I'm like, no, I don't, because I don't know any. And so when she said that, that's when the loving call out came through, and she's like, hey, I love what you do, but we're gonna have a conversation about why this is harmful to people in my community. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize how much harm that was. And we know that it's not even about intent, it's about the fact that the action happened. So I had to respond to that. So just to fast forward, I have the DM conversation with this account, and she starts to talk to me about boarding school. She started talking to me about settler colonialism, and how that perpetuates the invisibilization of Indigenous and Native peoples. And I'm just like, oh wow. So that's what I did. And I was so appreciative of that call in that I even said, hey, I'd love for you to come on to my podcast so we can do it in public, because guess what? I harmed you in public. Let's do it in public so that people know that, hey, I'm imperfect. And even though I do a lot of conversations around anti-bias, anti-racist practice, I also make mistakes as well. And I need to make sure that I'm showing how we can restore harm in our communities. So that's what brought this woman to my podcast, and her name is Trisha Mokino, who is a phenomenal educator, and has really taught me a lot about Indigenous history, but also just different aspects of the cultures from different tribal communities. And that really got me into a rabbit hole. So this is what's going on in this community. I want to know what's going on in Latin American communities. I want to know what's going on within the African diaspora, Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. So I just dug into this rabbit hole, and thankfully I had a podcast where I could bring on these different experts from these different communities and have these conversations. And it was through these counter stories that I decided we got to find a way to get all this together into one, because at least at the time that I was thinking about the book, there was no other book that was focused on anti-racism that really went into depth about each of these historically marginalized communities, as well as the diversity within each of them. And that's how I knew that this book was going to be different. And that's how Learn to Relearn was born, just from this curiosity that I had about different people and different cultures. And it's been amazing how it's evolved into what it is today. But I want to go ahead and just
Can I
hold.
just say something about that, please?
Yeah.
And the lesson that I'm taking, then, and I hope our viewers are taking, is the vulnerability in that.
Mhm.
And vulnerability is not easy. Humility is not easy to practice, although we know that should be the center of all of our teaching. But you could have said, "Oh, I've written 3 books before." You could have taken any position, but you chose humility, and you chose to lean into vulnerability so that Trisha could then become your teacher. And look what it gifted the world. The book with this title of what you experienced with that exchange with that beautiful sister, and other things that you talk about, like what we all need to relearn and what you've been relearning. I just wanted to take a moment to pause to really highlight that level of humility and vulnerability and what it can yield, right, if we're willing, to just lean into it.
Yeah, I love that you said that, and the fact that you were given the gift of truth, and instead of rejecting it or defending your intention, you took that gift and were gifted with something even bigger, is fabulous. And the world would be a better place if we could continue to lean into that vulnerability and accept those gifts of truth, even though it's hard.
Yes, very much so.
And I just wanted to chime in that I literally wrote down generosity and vulnerability on my, I'm always writing. I can't help it. When I was listening both to what you were saying before about the podcast, about the way you've used the podcast, because when I first started researching this book and I started listening to your podcast, I kept telling my colleagues, he is the most generous podcast host. There are podcasts where people get invited on and then the podcast host just keeps pivoting it back to themselves, right? and what I hear when I listen to your podcast is you are going in as a learner, you're modeling that for everyone, and you are trying to give as much space as you can to the people you have on your podcast so that we really get to hear a full perspective, not just little snippets, and we can all benefit and learn from them. And so through the podcast and through the book, like these are the words I always associate with you. My good friend, is just that you're so generous in the way you want to lift other people up and share their work. And you do that all throughout the book. You're raising other people's voices. And that I love how you start that book, this book with that story of having to learn to relearn yourself. And that I was actually thinking about the title. Kwame and I had many conversations about the title and ended up feeling like that's really at the heart of it. All of us, each of us have to commit to learning to relearn always and forever. We're never going to get all the way there, but we have to keep at it. And so you give us a roadmap for how to do that. And so that's part of why I love the title so much, because that is being an educator, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it's coming out at the time that it's coming out, given that it's coming out the day after my mom's birthday. Today's my mama's birthday. And then also,
Happy birthday.
So that part is just amazing in itself, because that's my first teacher. I mean, I tell this story all the time, and if people who have read my first book, Shape the Teacher Identity, in the beginning, I tell people, listen, I started my first 4 years in a self-contained special education classroom. I had an IEP. And what was the IEP for? It was for speech. I was the nonverbal kid that didn't want to talk to people. I'd rather just draw pictures. That was me at 5, 6, 7 years old. So for my mom to be the one to provide the interventions and try these different things to the point where she goes to IEP meetings, the teachers are wondering, Mrs. Mensah, what are you doing at home that's causing Kwame to grow so much? How often do you hear that in an IEP meeting? I mean, we've all been in the classroom. We know that's not something that happens all the time. But all that to say, for this to come out the day after my mom's birthday, knowing the role that she played in my development, that's not a coincidence. That's just divine. Like that's what's supposed to happen.
Divine gifts. It's gifts all around, right?
Yeah.
Did you wrap it up and give it to your mama as a birthday gift?
Yeah, she's been reading it. She's been reading it since she got it, because the copies came to Chicago. So I'm in Chicago right now. Just finished attending the SEL exchange through Castle. So that's why I was here.
Dr. Muhammad was there, I think.
I bumped into Goldie.
Yes.
Yeah, yesterday. So I bumped into her. So that was awesome. First time I actually seen her in person after all these years being virtual. So that was dope.
Wow.
Yeah. But I think for it to come out right after the elections that we just went through here in the States, and just seeing the amount of identity-based harm that's happening globally, when you think about what's happening, in the Gaza Strip, conflicts between Palestine and then with Israel, and then even what's happening in the Congo, what's happening in Sudan, trans people, queer people, people of the global majority. I mean, you name it. There's
Ukraine,
Iran,
Senegal.
Lebanon. You can go on and on, but there's identity-based harm that's happening throughout the world. So even though we are here in the States, the thing that I've come to realize about this book is the fact that this is a book that's going to potentially help a lot of global communities beyond the spaces that we are in. There is a growing need and an urge for these conversations to happen. Like, people really want to have the conversations. Children want to have these conversations. There's a reason why, I think months earlier, you had a string of protests happening on college campuses, protesting against was the killing of so many Palestinians. There's a growing urge to have the conversations about identity. And I think about my own life, and I wish I had those conversations earlier so that I would have a better sense of self when I was growing up. But I'm here now. I got my two young kings and my wife, and we're now having these conversations together with our kids. And I think it's important that parents and other stakeholders recognize that it's important that we do keep these conversations going, because I think in order for us to navigate these next 4 years and beyond that, it's going to require our stakeholders to play an even bigger role, because teachers who are in the classroom, depending on what state you're in, depending on what country you're in, you're not going to be able to talk about it as freely as others. So we need other people to serve as the mouthpiece. And I think teachers, as well, not teachers, but students, as well as their parents and other community members, they can be the mouthpiece for us. So that's something that I'm really imploring for folks to do with this book, is to have those conversations. Yeah, for sure.
I also think you talk a lot in the book about the background knowledge for teachers. So there's certainly a focus on having the conversations, but there's also, like, whether you're in a state where they sanction you talking about what's actually happening or not, we need to know more about the children we're teaching and the context we're teaching in, and how did it get to be the way it is? How did it get to be so unequal? And so I think regardless, I mean, if you're in a state where you're not supposed to talk about these, I feel like you have an extra need to get the book and learn, and so that you understand why you have people legislating that we cannot talk about race and identity. And so it's for your content knowledge of your students and their backgrounds.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I've come to realize, especially in my consultancy work, is that there are a lot of teachers who generally want to do the work, but they don't know where to start, or they get hung up on the fact that they're not as familiar with the terminology as they should be. Um, and I've actually wrote an article about this maybe a couple of years ago for EdPost, where we talk about the fact that it's not so much about knowing the terms, it's more about the spirit in which you do the work. And there are a lot of people who do identity-based work. There are a lot of people who do social emotional learning. There are a lot of people who do culturally relevant pedagogy in their class, but they may not even know that that's the term used to describe what they're doing. And I think if we can get more educators to get past that point and just evaluate how they're teaching students and interacting with them, I believe there'll be more people who will be emboldened to do this work even more, because they don't have to be concerned about the fact that they don't know what this term means or that term means.
I want to hear what Jennessa is thinking, but I did want to ask this question too. In the climate that we are in, Kwame, there are going to be folks that are getting drawn to your book because they know what's in there and it's going to be helpful.
Yes.
And maybe we're not concerned about those very people you're just talking about, but how do you hope this book could have a mass appeal to those who might be afraid to pick it up or maybe resistant? And I say that because the title is so inviting, but at the same time, the title shows you're going to have to do some work. And a lot of times people shy away from doing that work. So, I guess I'm going back to the title. I see the genesis of it, but where do you see maybe not limitations, but invitations and maybe things to overcome, for people to really get into this book and see what it's offering?
I think with regard to that, the first step is to unlearn some of the negative connotations that come with the terms that have been weaponized or being censored. So getting people to understand that when we use terms such as, for example, white supremacy culture or some iteration of that term, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bad person if you are white. It's more about the fact that we are in a country or a global society where our values, our traditions, our norms, our standards of living are ingrained within this culture. It's the default. Soon as you're born into this global society, those are the standards and criteria that you have to follow. There has to be an acknowledgement of that before we can even get into the work. So I would say just getting people clear on what these terms actually mean, because a lot of the reason why some folks are resistant to it is because they don't know what these terms mean. Like critical race theory, what does that mean? What does intersectionality mean? What is white supremacy culture? What does that mean? They're triggering, but if we actually take the time to study and do the research, then we realize, okay, now I see why it's called this. But not a lot of people want to do the research. And that's the part that we got to push more on. This is where the book talks are so essential. This is where it's good to have people who are facilitating these book talks in a way that allows for this critical dialogue to take place. So I would just tell people, do your own research. Don't just take at face value what I'm saying or what any of us are saying on this live. Research it for yourself. The information is out there more than ever. Like the things that I talk about in this book are things that have been spoken on in previous books and previous publications. I'm just building off the scholarship of ancestors who have been talking about this, most of whom are Black and brown, who unfortunately will not be able to reap the benefits of their labor financially because they're already gone. A lot of them were assassinated for speaking truth. And now you fast forward to where we are now. If you look in the back, you'll see the people, like the people who I leaned on, most of them are ancestors. They're all ancestors. You know, whether it's a James Baldwin, a Frantz Fanon, a Maya Angelou, a Fannie Lou Hamer, just to name a few, they paved the way in terms of their scholarship and their activism for me to be able to write this book. And, you know, when I write this book, when anybody writes a book that's standing on the shoulders of that scholarship, we're extending the lifeline for that scholarship. Yes, this is my book, but guess what? I'm also extending the lifeline for James Baldwin, for Bell Hooks, for Audre Lorde, and so many others who gave me the language through their scholarship to be able to articulate the vision of what I want this book to be for educators and those beyond that. So yeah, so it's, the more I talk about it, the more it gets me choked up a little bit, because just knowing the sacrifices they made for us to be able to have conversations like this is deep. And man, I know we just chatting, and this is so
I
organic.
was thinking about Jennessa. I know she's about to jump in and just
Jennessa, please.
Like,
I just wanted to pause, and I know we'll keep talking about the book because that's why we're here, but pause and tell you that I know you can't see it, but the energy that I'm feeling that has flipped in my core since I sat down is more than I thought I was going to get right now. And it's everything that I needed right now. We said at the time that's happening, it has been a week, and like I knew I was looking forward to tonight, but I didn't know I needed to hear the conversation that we're having as much as I need to hear it. And I am just so excited for people to be able to jump into the learning that you were talking about, to have those voices continued through you. And the fact that your book takes so many voices, so many perspectives, so many truths, and brings it together, I think is another way that we kind of alleviate how daunting the work is for folks. So instead of having to start at where do I research, what is credible, we're already jumping into it's here, right? It's here. Here is your credibility. What do you want to learn about now? What work are you ready to do? And if you're in a certain section of the book and you're like, all right, I feel like I'm on my journey in this particular area of the book and I'd like to learn more. Like Tracy said, you continue to be so generous. You're like, well, you want to put this down for a little bit? Here are some more books. Here's a podcast. Here's a website. You can continue to learn. And we know that depending on our own experiences, some of that learning is more challenging than other learning. When you get hit with some truth that you might not have known because we don't know what we don't know, it can be heavy and it can be hard. So I love that in your book, you can work around, and maybe I need to take a break from this learning in this moment. I can learn something else, but it alleviates the need to then go through and sift through everything that's out there, because we know not everything out there is something that's worth reading.
Yes.
Wow.
Woo.
Wow. Can I put out a request? I mean, I just want to put it out there because it's kind of on the spot, and no intention to put you on the spot. But Kwame, it would be wonderful if you could read something to us from the book, and maybe you're reading something that is attached to a specific memory or a specific moment or maybe it's one of those paragraphs, just, oh my gosh, this has to be in there. And then Tracy, I mean, if you don't mind, I would just love to get your response to whatever it is that he's reading, because to be an editor is such an intimate relationship with the writer. And, you know, just letting the people who are at home with us really get a chance to see the power of that relationship and how you can pinpoint a paragraph or a chapter or whatever. And you, Tracy, you've gone on this journey with him. So anyway, that just came to me just opening up. And Jennessa, I wanted to thank you for the brilliance that you just shared. All of what you said. I'm just really inspired by this conversation and grateful this book is now in the world.
Yeah, so that's actually gonna be my next question after I read this passage, because I do want to get Tracy in to just talk a little bit about our editing process, which had its ups and downs, but there's a lot there that we definitely want to unpack, because I feel like that's what allowed for this book to get to where it is. The editing, that was the key part of it, not even the writing, fine tuning and going through the different cycles. We'll get to it, but let me get a good paragraph here to read. I think something's moving me to read from the introduction. Let me see. Okay. So I'm gonna read a little bit here. And this is the intro. So Young, Black, and Misunderstood. So it goes like this. In 1998, after living abroad in Ghana for the previous 3 years, I enrolled as one of only 15 Black students in a predominantly white suburban high school in Connecticut. When my mom and I visited the school, the principal insisted that I be placed in a special education class because I came from Africa. She made this recommendation after my mom explained to her that I had lived in the United States and went to school in Connecticut prior to the move, spoke fluent English, and was doing well in my Ghanaian school. Basically, the principal wrongly presumed that the education I received in Ghana was inferior to the education here in the United States, even though the schoolwork I did in Ghana from grades 7 through 9 was 10 times more challenging and rigorous than the work I would go on to do in my 3 years at the high school. After that meeting, the principal placed me in general level classes for my entire sophomore year. It wasn't until the end of the year that they realized that I should have been in advanced classes all along. Considering the problematic and racialized history of academic track in the United States, my story should not come as a surprise. I am one of many Black boys who was tracked in lower level courses due to the negative perceptions that white teachers had about our academic abilities. And I was reminded of my high school experience recently when I came across a 1999 article from the Hartford Courant titled "Special Gift for Special Needs." It was a tribute to a special educator at my high school who earned Teacher of the Year honors. I was a 15-year-old sophomore when I was interviewed for this article. For the record, the teacher was phenomenal. There's no disputing that. What I found problematic, though, was a narrative that I was a high school student with special needs, which is totally false. This portrayal was difficult for me to process because the Hartford Courant represented a positive time in my early childhood. My older brother worked as a paperboy for the Hartford Courant as a teenager. I still fondly remember those Sundays when he'd wake up at 6 a.m. to help him stuff the Sunday papers with coupons and ads. With tremendous pride, I delivered papers with my brother throughout our hometown of Bloomfield, Connecticut. So it felt personal to read a piece in the Hartford Courant that failed to provide the full context of my educational experience. So that's just the first couple paragraphs of the intro. And the reason why I chose it is because I wanted to emphasize the importance of the counter story. And one of the great features of this book is the fact that there's over 30 educators represented in this book. Some of these educators are K-12 teachers. Some of these educators are people in academia in some capacity, whether they're researchers or professors in the universities. And then you have some who are nonprofit organization founders or people who just work with children directly within their communities. So a wide, diverse range of voices. And it was important for me to set it up that way because the narratives that were talked about when I was growing up were narratives that didn't match how I felt about myself. And I didn't have the agency at that time to shift it. It was given away to a newspaper that I grew up reading as a kid. So I just thought to myself, how many other kids who are in my position who gave their agency away and they were never able to reclaim it to be able to tell the story that they wanted to tell to the world about themselves. And that's the part that really stuck with me. And it's funny that I mention it now because a book that I'm reading right now is The Message from Ta-Nehisi Coates. And everything that he's talking about is about the counter story, how that's essential to understanding the lifeline of people from different communities, to understand the complexities and the nuances of their histories and their cultures. You can't get that from a secondary source. You need those first person perspectives. And that's why I was so adamant about decentering myself as much as possible because, and this is going to segue into the editing process. That was one of the challenges about this book is making sure that you're telling the right stories about these different communities that you're not a part of. Me being a cis hetero Black male, I knew that I couldn't talk freely or as in depth about LGBTQ plus issues. That's not my place to do it. Let me bring on the people who can. All other communities, Latinx communities, that chapter. I'm a monolingual individual. I can't speak about the history of Spanish or even the nuances and complexities of Spanish in the classroom without talking to folks who are from Latin American countries and learning about the ways in which their dialect was marginalized because it wasn't something that aligned with the Castilian standard of Spanish, right? Like there's the depth that's necessary to tell that story is not coming from me. It's got to come from somebody else. And I can go on, but I want to bring Tracy on to talk a little bit more about this because this is something that we grappled with throughout this process. But I want to know from you, as the editor of the book, number one, what was the most challenging part of editing this book in your opinion? And then how did that process grow you as an individual?
Ooh.
Two-parter.
Okay, so I have to write those down. So most challenging, and how did I grow? Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to get to those two, but can I speak to the excerpt that you shared just for a minute because it brings up so many different complexities of the editing process. So first of all, you said editing more than writing, and that's just can never be true. I can't edit what somebody doesn't write. My friend Terry Thompson used to say that. But also, I can work with people on sentence structure. I can work with people on organization. I can work with people on voice. People have to have ideas. A writer has to have ideas. You have to have something to say. And you had so much to say, which is what made this book so fun to work on, right? So what you brought, I was trying to help you figure out what do you want to say. So one of the things we talked about in that section was the balance between memoir and generative storytelling. Because in a book, when you tell a story for teachers, the idea there is to tell a story that will generate thinking in that reader, that will go on beyond that story, right? When you tell a classroom story or you tell a personal story. And so you had so many goals right there. You're trying to introduce yourself to the reader. You're trying to form a bond with your reader by sharing, a deeply personal story about yourself, was really important. But we had to keep the story contained to the parts that were going to then be useful to that reader going forward. Then one of the most fun parts of this book, because just like you were saying, obviously these communities are not monolithic.
Mhm.
And you and I mean, I'm coming at it from a different perspective than you as a white woman, right? And a straight white woman, and I live in New England. And I mean, we just have a very different background as well. We brought in so many outside readers for this book, as well as lifting voices from the podcast and articles. And we also we paid people to read sections, experts in different subject areas. And this particular section, we had a reader who pushed both our thinking about the complexity of this story, because she was saying two things are true at once. Black boys are overrepresented in special education, and that's a problem. Like that, there's racism in that. We have to talk about that. And saying that it was bad that you ended up in special education is ableist, because we've got a stigma around special education. And so it's not inherently bad that someone's in special education, but should you have been in there and why? And so how do we talk about a story like that, holding those different things, right? Like, let's not assume that someone who was in special education, let's think about the cascade of assumptions that follow from that, right? So and what it has meant in your life as someone with graduate degrees and scholarship and books that you've written, to have started with this, label and the stigmas that are very much attached to it, and the questions about whether you are in the right place or not, means something in your life. But then we're in a context of how do we look at students in special education, and how do we look at race, and how do we look at the intersection of race and special education, and who gets identified and who does not, right? And so it was totally fascinating to work on the piece together and then have her read it and say, I want to raise, this felt ableist to me. Like, can we talk about the language you're using? And then you and I went back and revised further. And I think one of the things that I love in the book is you say, even as you're learning to relearn, you're still, Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. You're learning. And so you say, the language I'm using, the stories I'm telling, this is the best I have in me at the time. And I'm going to keep being pressed. So we tried to consider everyone's perspective and make sure we were never doing harm in any way, right? Top priority. But also we were broadening and being inclusive and lifting. But also knowing, in 10 years, how am I going to think about that story? So let me think about, how do I want to talk about it here? So it's a really complex book to edit, because we were always trying to be sensitive to how might this be read by somebody with a very different cultural background or a different lens on the world, which is part of why we were leaning on friends and experts and scholarship to press on us to let's really make sure we nail this down. So that the excerpt you chose, just to get at what you were saying before, Dr. Sealey Ruiz, I don't think I can call you on them too.
No, listen, we're all family here. This is like a family gathering, and on behalf of Kwame's.
Okay. So I'm I get a little warm saying that, but thank you. But it even just in, that was 2 paragraphs, you get a sense of the conversations we needed to have, and the level of thinking in the process of writing and editing. I think, to get back to your questions for me, Kwame, the most challenging thing is my own guilt at the timing of this book and what was happening in the publishing industry. And that was, we were working in a context that, I'm not representing anybody but myself now, so I can just say, there was a whole explosion at Heinemann, at another publishing house, and authors felt very betrayed, especially anybody working in anti-bias, anti-racist work felt very betrayed by what happened at Heinemann. And so Kwame, and you had a wonderful editor at Heinemann, but and some of the editors felt betrayed as well. And I want to give you a second to shout out.
Yes. I'm going to shout out Holly Kim Price.
Yeah.
So Holly is the reason why Learn to Relearn got into the door at Heinemann. So the journey really starts with her.
That's right.
She was the only editor of color on the Heinemann staff at the time that the proposal got accepted in late 2021. And it was at a time where Heinemann and its parent company, HMH, they were going through there was some transition happening, but there was also a great deal of censorship that was taking place. And it led to a lot of people who inspired me to do this work. People like Liz Kleinrock, people like the Hermans from Multicultural Classroom, Cornelius Minor, so many to name. All these are Heinemann authors or former Heinemann authors, most of them are. So when the censorship started to happen, when you heard people talking about divisive methods and all this other stuff, I'm like, if they're doing this to curriculum, like reading curriculum, at some point they're going to get to the professional books. So that's why I jumped ship, because there was already resistance internally within the company before I even got the contract. It really took me maybe 4 months before I got the contract. 4 months, because the former president was like, and I can say this now, but the former president of HMH or Heinemann, one of them, was like, yeah, I don't think we're in a position, and I'm paraphrasing, to work on Kwame's book. We're not ready for that subject matter.
Wow.
There was resistance.
Somebody else was ready.
Other people were ready to go. There were other people that were ready to go. But for a president to say that, I knew that this was going to be a very non-linear journey. Now, did I know that I was going to eventually leave Heinemann and then, fall into the lap of Stenhouse? No, I didn't know that.
So, and the nonlinear aspect is an understatement, because when I first met Kwame, he had just come through this. I mean, all the Heinemann authors we were talking to at the time felt very betrayed. It had seemed like the home of this really good work, and people felt betrayed. So then we went through a long process of building trust with one another and seeing if we were a good match. You were looking at other publishers, and we connected, and we were both so excited to work on this book at Stenhouse. And then Stenhouse went through a giant change. So Stenhouse is owned by Highlights for Children. And there was some reorganization. And right after, like literally within a month of us signing this book, my publisher and I went head to head, and she said, she let me go. Because I wasn't working full time there, or I don't know. Nobody believes the reason I was given. I'm just gonna. So then they were just gonna fire me. And the first thing I said was, "What about Kwame? Like why would you let me promise to see his book through if you knew you were gonna do this?" Because he was just hurt by another publishing house, and we had quite the heated conversation about it. And she said, well, we'll reassign him to another editor. And I was very, very angry about how you were caught twice in, the crossfire in these different publishing houses. So I said, I want to do this book. I want to see this through. And we made a separate contract for me to do it outside of the company as a freelancer. And in my heart of hearts, that is totally what I wanted to do. And I wanted to step up and do this for you. And then I didn't understand how hurt I was by what happened with the publishing house. So it became hard to, like, all of it was like, you and I were always wonderful, but the surround was kind of threatening to taint things. And it was hard for me to kind of, I felt very devalued in what happened there. So So then I needed you to call me in. Eventually you said to me, Tracy, you're my friend, but we need to get this book done. I really appreciated it. You did it in the sweetest way. You said, otherwise, it's going to affect our friendship. Like we've got to get moving. And so then it was like, okay, let's go. And so I still feel sorry I wanted to be there completely for you, but I also feel like, I don't know if I was white savioring in that moment of like, I think I was to some degree. Maybe it would have been better not to keep it because I was in my own thing, but I still wanted to be loyal to you. And so we just had to work through all that. So that, I didn't expect to tell the story here on this podcast, but
but I think it's good that we're mentioning it because there's a lot of lessons there that people can learn. There's a lot of metaphors there, which I'll get to. But I want to say this about Tracy. This is why she's like the best editor, and I'm gonna try to do this without crying, because she was going through a lot at that time. Come on, Kwame.
It's okay to have feelings, Kwame.
There was so much. I don't think people recognize there was so much going on in her personal life, and for me to tell her, hey, like we gotta get this book done, that was not an easy thing to do because sometimes people need that space to get themselves together, and she really needed the space. And I felt really bad for having to do it, but then at the same time I knew that there was some momentum that we needed to generate in order to get to the finish line. And I'm just thankful that Tracy was the one to be my editor, because you could tell, yes, clearly she is a white woman, but you could tell that she's done a lot of the work. The way there were times where I would submit the manuscript and she'd be like, I don't know, we should use this word. There were times where she was doing that. I said, oh, okay. Or this might be offensive, or let's get out the passive voice. That was a favorite thing. You're in the passive voice, Kwame. Get into your active voice. Let's be direct. Let's go for the jugular. Like
I remember the first thing where that came up was I was like, you're being too apologetic to your white readers here. You can go ahead and be a little firmer here, because you were kind of couching things. And I was like, you know what? I think you can say the thing. Just go ahead and say the thing. And you were like, oh, all right, let's go. Because it was really interesting. That conversation was interesting. And I kept having to think, am I being appropriate here? Like you are the expert in this topic, and I need to be mindful of that. And, and I'm reading all the texts and reading the court documents and, rewatching the video of Toni Morrison talking about the white gaze to be like, exactly what did she mean here? And how's he? And then I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go tell a Black man about how he's interpreting Toni Morrison here. This is a little terrifying, and so we had to just keep being vulnerable, because what we cared about was that we could stand behind the work at the end of the day. So we had to not be afraid to say, like, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about it. But it was hard. And I just appreciated your gentleness with me, because what I didn't say, and what Kwame, I think, is partly referring to, is my father was dying through all that. It was just a rough stretch, right? So but now we're on the other side of so many things. My dad would be very proud of this book. And along with your mom, I'm so glad is here to see it.
Yeah. But I just to add to what you're saying, Tracy, what you just described is why this book is necessary. This is what the book can do. You just said you had to rewatch documentaries. You had you checking me in a moment where I'm centering whiteness. I am prioritizing the comfort of white folks in my writing. You called me out on that in your own loving way. But these are some of the habits that I hope that educators who pick up this book and people who are not in education, anybody who picks up this book, I hope that they pick up on those nuances, because that's what we need to do. These are the habits that we need to build. These are the muscles we need to strengthen in order to really engage in this anti-bias, anti-racist, equity, abolitionist work. We have to do this. And so I'm glad that she challenged me in that way, because if she had not said that, I would have just kept on going in that passive voice and prioritizing white folks. But I'm glad that I didn't do that. And she reminded me, well, listen, and not just her, but other peer reviewers who were in the process. They were like, nah, you got to go harder. You got to go harder. You give them a pass.
That's right.
You gotta go harder. Like that was Tracy for the entire process.
Wow.
And it just comes to let you know that the learning is possible if people have, I'm gonna throw in, I know Yoli will appreciate this, if people have the critical love and humility to do that. Like if they really understand, like, and acknowledge, I don't know everything about your culture and where you come from. I know that I have certain biases and certain stereotypical notions about your people that I need to unlearn and unpack and eradicate altogether. But I'm gonna push through this learning and get to a place where there's clarity on my end, so I develop my own perspective and not be stuck in this echo chamber. So even in the editing process, we were learning to relearn, we were unlearning. So the title is very much in parallel to the work that we were actually doing leading up to where we are today.
Signifying on it. Well, you know what, Jennessa, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you would find maybe a paragraph or something in the book. I would like to just read a little bit as a teaser from the foreword to encourage those who are listening. Like, this is really a powerhouse of a book. And it is a book that addresses like the pedagogy of now in so many ways. And as we see people's culture in the process of being erased, some of the policies that are coming down from Project 2025, specifically in education, erasure of just LGBTQ2S plus folk, African American courses being erased, all of the things. Kwame, you have it in this book. So I just wanted to give you a little heads up. Jennessa, maybe you can find something, but I just wanted to share this little piece from the foreword that I was so blessed to write.
Yes.
With learning to relearn, Sarfo-Mensah has written himself into the canon of scholars who boldly advocate for social justice in schools. This book informs and prepares teachers to do the work of becoming anti-racist. It delves deeply into how racism is perpetuated in our schools and how it is taught in homes and how it manifests in society in direct and very nuanced ways. I view my work in the academy and in schools through the lens of racial literacy. I am interested in how history influences how people understand race in their lives today. My approach to learning and writing about race is what gave me a deeper appreciation for learning to relearn, as it provides both a historical basis and a modern day understanding of systemic racism as an approach to building the reader's racial literacy. So it's a lot going on in the book. It definitely feels like a 12-year-long course. No, it feels like when Jennessa was talking about like this, Kwame, you were talking about the citations. It really does feel like a repository, this beautifully crafted database that is part personal story, because that's always important.
Yeah.
And a discussion of the literature, and just this incredible resource list to do that further work. So once again, thank you. And that's one of my favorite sections of the foreword, because I feel it really captures what it is you were trying to do. And Tracy, hearing you and Kwame talk, clearly that was the mission in your mind as well.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Jennessa, you got that excerpt?
I do have that excerpt. I have that excerpt, and I do have, just a little tidbit to add, not just on the words in the book, but when you and Tracy were talking about calling each other out on things, I want people to know how much that transferred even into when we were working together and we were talking about imagery. And we all had different ideas, and coming together, I took all these notes and, stressed a little bit, making sure, how do you capture so many identities and not leave things out, but make them look like teachers without children and make it not that busy? And I landed on one that I said, I think this is it. And I passed it, and Tracy immediately got back to me with a bunch of notes, and they were so thoughtful. It was down to like the shirt on one of the people on the cover. I do not think that is a shirt that we want to put on that person, because I think it comes too close to stereotypes of that group. And I was like, oh, shoot, you are absolutely correct. And I did not even see it through I'm constantly doing equity work. Like you said, you're learning to relearn. And I had passed it around, and I passed it around to, my now 16-year-old, who is very brutally honest with me and has sat in ethnic studies courses with me at Harvard Ed. So her lens is strong. She was participating in those classes at 10 years old, and we didn't catch any of that, but Tracy did. And it just goes to show that every single little detail, down to the lanyard on the neck of one of the people on the front cover, is like a nod to the LGBTQ plus community. There are all these little teeny tiny things. And if there's that much thought and effort going into just a cover, you can imagine how much went into every word on every page. And that is a huge feat. So congratulations to both of you. And thank you for putting in that long work while life was being very lifey. So I am in a section that's the whitewashing of Black culture from American history. It wasn't until I minored in African American studies at Temple University that I really started to learn about Black history. Throughout my K-12 schooling, I was only exposed to romanticized post-racial narratives of Black historical figures such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks every February for Black History Month. Unsatisfied, I turned to hip-hop music, which served as my Black history curriculum. It taught me how the complete omission of historical facts is just as psychologically damaging to Black students as the purposeful altering of facts. It also made me aware of how white historians and writers have used this omission tactic to create a biased and racist historical narrative about America. And this is hitting home for me because my own curriculum has shifted in my classroom, and it has lessened the amount that I was able to share before. And knowing how psychologically damaging it can be, I am finding myself having to do some learning on how to incorporate things in ways that I haven't before. And it's just a reminder that we are constantly having to make sure that the things we know need to happen are happening. And we don't get comfortable enough to forget to check to make sure that we're doing the work that we think we're doing. So that excerpt just feels like it's playing a role in my classroom right now for me as an educator. And then also, I thought I hated history growing up because I just never saw representations of folks that looked like my family, or had ancestry like my family. And the only times I did, it was one of such violence
Right.
and oppression that it was something that I really didn't enjoy. It also reminds me of a story that I was given by somebody else that talked about a student saying, like, "Oh, slavery again," when they mentioned that they were going to read about Black folks. And it's important to raise that we are not erasing the identities of anyone in the classroom, but especially marginalized groups, because not saying anything can be worse than saying something.
Ooh, and
Wow.
yeah, wow, wow, wow.
I
I'm so
wanted
glad. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm just excited.
Go
I
ahead.
something, and I wanted to read something from the book, actually from page 5, when you said enslavement, where you say that enslaved peoples literally built the nation's most elite institutions. In contemporary context, the majority of funding for public K through 12 school districts come from local property taxes. This means that the zip codes into which children are born and are racially segregated neighborhoods determine the educational opportunities. All too often, students descended from enslaved and erased ancestors and resource-deprived elementary and high schools and are likely to grow up in families that are purposely cordoned off from generational wealth. I mean, it's these kinds of nuggets and factoids, and that's from page 5. These, and I don't know if I'm getting it all mixed in. That could either be that you lifted up from Lee Patel or it was you. The point I'm making is whatever the topic is in the book. And Kwame, how long did it take? My question, and then I promise to be quiet because I know you have questions for me and Jennessa. But my gosh, how long did it take in the planning of this book? And did you know you needed it to be so comprehensive? Because it feels like a book, it feels like a textbook, it feels like a book that's easy to read. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I knew that this was going to be comprehensive for sure. Now, I didn't realize that it would amount to over 300 pages of hard research and counter story. I didn't anticipate that at all. I was thinking it was going to be half of that length. But as we went deeper into the writing process, I recognized how just how much research is necessary to get the stories right. When I first started the writing process for the book, it started out as a bunch of surveys. So this is 2020, 2021. I am putting out surveys that was going to get feedback from different educators who would tell me about specific K-12 issues that impacted their respective communities. So that's how it started. So I was able to get a few people to respond to that survey. And, from there, I had to add more meat to the main script. So I started to, cycle through some of my old podcast episodes and start to strategize on how I can share the stories. And what I came to realize was I can pretty much write a chapter focus on each historically marginalized community because of just the roster of people I had on my podcast. So that's how I was able to categorize it. And then I was able to get into the themes and do subcategories. But it was a process that took a minute, and I knew that it was going to be comprehensive. It had to be. What I didn't realize was how much time it would take to get there. Like, when you're doing it, like, you don't realize how hard it is until you actually are entrenched in the process. I knew it was going to be work, but boy, I mean, to go through the sensitivity reads, um, it's just some of the feedback. I mean, Yoli, like you've gone through a whole doctoral program, so you know how this goes. So for me, like going through that, reviewing the books that I was going to use for my research, talking to people, interviewing them, getting their feedback, and then doing some rewriting. I mean, there was one chapter, I think it was the Black Perspectives chapter, that we had to essentially rewrite because there was so much red ink across the manuscript that we had to address. But yeah, it was a lot. It was definitely a lot. But I'm glad that it happened because it was the most humbling thing that could have happened. And it should serve as a lesson for those who really want to engage in this work. You
Can
have
I
to
just,
have that
sorry.
motivation. Go for it, Tracy.
I
Please.
just wanted to add one tiny thing, piggybacking off that and connecting to what Jennessa said, because one of the outside reviewers really did a beautiful job talking to you about, I know you have to talk about pain and oppression, but
Yes.
she said, you need to talk about agency, you need to talk about solidarity, you need to talk about joy, you need to talk about present day work. And so because of her feedback within one chapter, you ended up adding a section in each chapter about current social movements, students taking their lives into their own hands, the positive work people were doing, and also saying, students should learn names from these communities. They should learn about people from these communities, but not just the same old cast of characters, right? They should also learn, like, I know you interviewed Donovan James, who wrote this great book called Beyond February, celebrating Black history all year. I think that's what it's called. And she highlights all kinds of scholars and artists, and so that, because of that outside reviewer, you started saying, this is right. We can't just, that reaction you talked about, Jennessa, of a student saying, oh, if we're talking about Black people, we're talking about slavery, or we're talking about, slavery or the civil rights movement, that's it. That's the whole story. But that's not the whole story of this whole diverse and wonderful and complex history and group of people. And so I think that outside read, it caused a whole bunch of work, right? Because then you had to kind of rebalance within the chapter and say, I've got to make sure I'm getting enough of the joy and the strength and the solidarity and the positivity as well. But that was crucial. That was crucial feedback that we got from her.
Oh, yes. And shout out to Catherine. Yes, shout out to her because she gave me that feedback and I was like, okay, I understand the assignment. Let's go.
You did.
After breathing really hard and give myself some time to process, I got back in it and we got it done. But yeah, shout out to Catherine. That was invaluable, that advice. But there were many people throughout this process who was giving me advice similar to that. And that's what I want to keep on stressing. It was all community. Community is what got this book to where it is. And it's going to be community that's going to get us into a place of liberation. We can't do this. I can't do this by myself. My hope is that somebody reads this book and says, man, Kwame, you got a lot of great information there. I want to build off of this. I want to write a book that's even better than this so we can keep the scholarship going. And I don't say better than this in terms of like making it a competition, but more so, let's build off of this momentum because that's what's going to, that's the attitude we have to combat this, to combat what's going on, to navigate this terrain that we have to navigate politically, is the fact that there's already a lot of censorship going on, but there's so many of us in academia, in K-12, in other industries that are very much aligned and passionate about this work, more so than elected officials who could care less about it. It's the math. Like, you do the math, there's so many more of us than there are of them. So my whole thing is we got to keep on writing. Maybe it's not a book. Maybe it's a blog. Maybe it's a short publication. Maybe it's a research paper. Maybe it's a vlog. Maybe it's a podcast. but we have to continue to document and share the stories and just kind of compound the interest of that because that's what's going to be the way that we counteract these negative forces that are being imposed on us right now. But yes, it was a very, very tedious process that I feel should serve as a lesson or a teachable moment for those who do want to do this. Yes. Oh, Jennessa, we got to talk about a little bit more about this cover right here. We have to, because people cannot stop raving about this cover. Like I said, I'm in
It's
Chicago.
beautiful. It's
I was at
beautiful.
this, and anytime I talked about this book, I made sure I had this copy with me as I'm talking to other attendees about it, and they're like, "Wow, this cover is amazing. The cover is amazing."
Thank
So
you.
I gotta. So we gotta talk about this. I want you to just share a little bit about just the process, because yes, I gave some. I'm not non-negotiables, but just some things
No,
about what she
you were very open.
and I just
You and
for it.
Tracy were very open. I kind of, after our first meeting, our first conversation, I hung up and I thought to myself, like, there's got to be a gotcha. That felt too easy. Like the energy was too aligned. I'm used to there being more hiccups, and we were able to have conversations together, and there were lots of different ideas getting thrown out, but it was wonderful to throw out ideas and really be able to talk to one another. And I believe I that was one of the sessions that I had my iPad and I was sketching out some things while we were talking and saying, like, this is what I see. And normally I try to paint the picture for folks and I give it back to them, but we were trying to work on a really, really tight turnaround. And I was also going through some things in
Mhm.
my personal life. So I was sketching out and sending them and saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I had not known myself as an artist, some of the things that you have to think about with a cover. I used to designing for the piece, but not designing for other elements. So it was an amazing learning process for me. And once I was given this list of, more of a wish list, and it didn't feel like non-negotiables, then we really got into, well, we want there to be technology to represent that people are working on technology, but we want there to be resources there because we're encouraging people to be reading books. We want there to be some note taking. We want there to be, different pens and markers, because that's what it looks like when you're in a brainstorming session with folks that you can truly learn with, when you're not getting lectured at, but you're learning with collaboratively. And we really wanted it to look like it was collaborative. And I got in my own head a little bit about wanting to make sure that the small things did not hit stereotypes. Like I didn't want to make anybody standing too much taller than someone else, making it look like somebody's voice was higher than anybody else's. I wanted, no one's back towards each other, so it looked like nobody was behind or getting left behind, that it was everybody was in on a conversation. We wanted to do these little subtle nods, like the cover of the computer, having Learn, Grow, and Imagine, which is actually similar to the cover of the computer that I
Yeah.
have, that I bring
Nice.
to work
Yeah.
with my students. So there's these little teeny tiny things, and just notes on the post-it notes. There is these little teeny tiny details. What can we incorporate that really, if you've been in that collaborative space, you know that that's what it feels like, but in a way that is sensitive to everyone and doesn't put one voice above everyone else. which can be complicated to do. And then it was incredible to see that style carried through the book. I opened it up, it got all choked up. It was great. I brought it into my students and I shared about my experience with them as well. So I teach fourth graders. Some people think they're babies, but it's incredible what those babies are willing to learn about and talk about when you give them the space. And we were mentioning, what do you want to be when you grow up, and how that's a daunting question, especially I'm working with 9 and 10-year-olds. I said, friends, I learned about new jobs. They said, new jobs. Kids are always amazed that you learn new things. And I brought in the book and I told them, did you know that there are people, if you like books, they just deal with fonts. And one kid said, I love words. And it was just this opportunity to talk about the book and share that you could have these other things going on, and that the book was helping teachers become better teachers by letting every student share their identities is kind of how I put it. And it opened up the door for a lovely conversation in my class too. So even after we finished together, had a beautiful conversation with my students who were really excited and asking amazing questions. So even kids that have not read the book yet are starting to talk about parts of the book. And I hope that happens for all our educators, because we should be taking pieces from the book and bringing them back to our students in ways that allow them to take that information and carry it forward. So your knowledge will go through.
Thank you for mentioning that. There's a one point I was going to make, but here's the first point. So I actually just did a whole workshop with the International School in the UK. 400 students, grades 6 through 12, where we were talking about identity, privilege, and belonging. And they're doing exercises from the book where they're matching their identity markers with the criteria for a dominant culture. And from there, they were able to have some dialogue about like who they are. Like, oh, I'm neurodiverse, I have ADHD, but guess what? Like, that's something I embrace. That's an asset for me. I'm Indian, and people, I've dealt with Islamophobia in the different international schools I've been a part of. Like, students, we're talking 12 through 18 years old, are opening up about these stories and being very candid in their commentary. And I just keep thinking to myself, it's actually easier, from my experience at least. I feel like students are more open and transparent
Oh,
in doing
yes.
exercises compared to the adults that I've worked with. It's amazing how
Oh, yes.
open students are and how they just dive right into it. And it just comes to show you that they really want to engage in this work. They really want to have the conversation. We just need to provide a platform for them to do that. Now, the other point I want to make before we start to wrap up is this cover would not have worked if it wasn't somebody of color. I want to make sure I name that, because just to tell you a little bit about the process, I always told myself the cover has to be a person of color, but more specifically, it had to be a woman of color. And the reason why is because representation matters. And just following the spirit of the book, we know that Black women still are the most disrespected, most disrespected women in our society. And I think this past election pretty much qualified that point. But I wanted to make sure that the cover was representative of the culture. So if it was like, it wouldn't have worked if it was a white person who did the cover. It just was not going to work. So we were very intentional about making sure, like, no, I will search for somebody. Just give me some time. I was telling Tracy, And a shout out to Cassia too, and the rest of the Stenhouse team. They were very receptive and said, you know what, Kwame, we're gonna let you go ahead. Let's go find the right illustrator. And Jennessa was somebody that I had known because I taught in Boston for a number of years. So Boston is small, greater Boston area, Cambridge, like it's small. So like you're gonna run into people in different venues, and I knew that she was an artist too and a teacher. And I said, oh, that's a perfect
I think we were
combination.
both very active during the pandemic. We were finding our people virtually.
Yeah. So I just felt like she'd be the perfect fit, and I'm so glad that she was the one, that you were the one to do this. And this is her first cover, y'all. This is her first cover. She had never done this before. This is her first one, and it will not be the last.
Not the last.
Not the last. And I just want to name, like, it is my first. And while I do digital work and, I paint 100-foot walls and on all kinds of other things, I do work on community pieces frequently. So I'm used to being able to take other people's voices and represent it in an image. This is the first time that I'm doing a cover, and you're gonna get a little emotional. It is different as a Black woman artist who, I focus my art on uplifting Black people. So not only am I a person who is not always feeling welcomed in spaces, I am creating work that is not welcomed in spaces. So to be given this opportunity is much more than the book for me. And I truly understand and appreciate that this opportunity is going to continue to open other doors for me that I wouldn't have been able to do myself, because it takes a little bit before you can find folks that are willing to give you a chance before you're signed off on by somebody else. So thank you for being able to sign off on some of my gifts and my talents. It was a pleasure to work with you both.
So it was such a blessing. My goodness. Do you remember those Zooms from your classroom at the end of the day?
My students are walking in right now.
I know. And all I thought was, I want to be in this classroom. The feeling among you and your students, it was like, oh my God, this is the perfect person to do this cover, because at a very emotional, spiritual level, you got it. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Oh, mate, that's pretty good. But I don't know if you can see them. Can you see those little wavy, spirally lines? This is one of my
pages in the book.
Yeah. And I remember asking Jennessa about those. And do you remember you described what it felt like to collaborate? And this like buzzing of ideas and energy. And it was such a beautiful, this is where artists, you can do things visually that I don't have the words for, but you created this feeling of what do we want colleagues to do together? This is a book to read with other people if you can. And so I went to the design team at Stenhouse and I said, I love this so much. And so then they carried, those words.
That was amazing to see.
All the way through the book, because it's this spirit of ideas and, swirling around you as you're engaging in the practice of getting better at this incredibly difficult job with other people who are also doing the work to try to get better. And that was so much of the spirit of what we wanted in the book. And so your art was essential in kind of lifting Kwame's vision for how this book would play a role in people's lives. So it just felt like the synergy was unbelievable. It just felt like a perfect combination.
It was great synergy.
Thank you.
And then I know we're kind of at time, and we could just keep on going, but I know Yoli, she gotta go. I think just to kind of wrap things up, maybe just one thing. It could be a call to action, just one final thought that you want to share before we wrap things up.
I'm happy to go. And I'm not just saying this, but seriously, go buy and read this book and use it as a resource, especially now in the times that we're in.
Tracy, you go ahead. We'll go counterclockwise from where I'm at.
I just adding to that, I have been struck in the last week or week and a half how community has become more important than ever, because it was such an isolating experience to go through this election. And I don't know if isolating is the right word, but it felt dehumanizing, that they're like and cruel. And so the book and Kwame as the creator and Jennessa's art, it's so humanizing. So much of this book is about seeing the humanity in one another, in your students, in your colleagues, and in yourself and your own growth. And so I completely agree that it's a book for this moment, because it's work, but it also is going to make you feel better about your connections with other human beings, which feels like really what we need right now. And, you know, specific things to do, but also just that deeper, we're in this together feeling.
Yeah, I had mentioned earlier that this is kind of like a great starting point. A great starting point that you heard has the voices, perspectives of over 30 educators there. There's things to learn with, and then there are also continued learning opportunities all within this book. And if you are like me and a lot of the colleagues that I have, you are looking for an immediate action call to counter what is happening right now. And this is a great starting point to lean into, so that we can do some of the hard work that needs to happen in the next 4 years and more to come.
Yes. But and ladies, thank you all for being a part of this. I just wanted a space for us to just have these reflections and just to celebrate, because so often we're on the go that we don't get a chance to sit back and just reflect on the wins along the way. There were just way too many wins to just not have this celebration. And I want to thank those who have been with us for the past 90 minutes. I know some had to go in and out of the stream, so I see some of my people out here. Shout out to Shauna Brown, aka T for the Culture, you know, my fellow Temple sister. You know, Go Owls. Shout out to Trisha Freeman, another phenomenal international educator. You know, so many. Zenda Walker, who's awesome. I mean, you got to get her books. Zion's Crown, Zara's Wash Day, talking about just the essence of Black hair and the history behind it. So these are people who are in the community, and they're a part of that process. You know what I mean? So that's what this book was about. But just one last thing, and this is the most important thing. I'm going to share my screen real quick, because we need for people to go ahead and get this book. So y'all, I'm blessing y'all with the website. So this is the website for the book, learn-to-relearn.com. It is open access. Over here, you'll be able to purchase your copy from here. It'll take you directly to the Amazon page where you can get your copy. But you have all these different guides. So all of the recommendations that are inside the book at the end of each chapter are on this site. So it is easily accessible. You can make sure to explore there and really take advantage of the recommendations, take advantage of the research, and most importantly, spread the word to people who you know are engaged in this work. As we've mentioned time and time again, this work does not happen without the community. And I'm fortunate to have this community that I have here today, as well as those who are watching. So thank y'all. And We finally made it, y'all.
Hey, congratulations on a beautiful
Yes.
job.
Congratulations. I do have one last request. 'Cause
Yes.
I want to hold on to this energy. If we could just, I'm going to screenshot us.
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
If
Jennessa,
we could be,
We gotta do that.
I
yeah, if
don't
you're
have
ready to
mine,
close, hold on.
but I've got this.
You've got that. That is enough love, right? Here we go. Ready? And smile. I got it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kwame. Thank you, Tracy. A pleasure. Jennessa, a pleasure. So beautiful.
All
Such
Thank
an
right.
you for the
honor to
energy.
be
I'm
with you
holding
all.
this.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm holding this one close. Kwame, thank you.
Thank y'all. And thank you all for watching the stream. We're about to close it right here. Learn to Relearn's out tomorrow. Go get the book, share the word with people. Anybody can get this book. This is what we need right now. This is
Everybody should get this book.
Everybody.
Everybody.
So let's make it happen, y'all. All right.
Yes.
Have
Good night,
a good
everyone.
evening. Good night.
Good night,
And
everyone.
yeah, let's take care.
Good night.